2 hours ago, the White House delivered what they called a non-negotiable ultimatum to Canada. Accept American trade terms by month's end or face consequences designed to cripple the Canadian economy. 50% blanket tariffs on all goods, energy restrictions, complete suspension of preferential partner status across federal procurement. Senior officials in Washington framed it as the final move in a long game. Maximum pressure, no wiggle room, submit or suffer. Mark Carney's response wasn't what anyone expected. Not public outrage, not private negotiation, not desperate calls for compromise. He walked to a podium and systematically dismantled every assumption Washington had made about Canada's vulnerability. In doing so, he revealed something the Trump administration didn't intend to show: how dependent America actually is on the neighbor it was trying to bully. Let's understand what Trump actually demanded, because the specifics reveal the strategy. First, Canada must eliminate all retaliatory tariffs against American goods within 14 days. Every restriction, every provincial ban, gone. No reciprocal American concessions offered. Just unilateral surrender. Second, Canada must commit to purchasing a guaranteed minimum of American-manufactured goods annually. Not through market competition, through government mandate. Washington wants Canadian tax dollars flowing to American factories regardless of price or quality. Third, Canada must abandon all trade negotiations with nations Washington considers strategic competitors. China, India, anyone under American sanctions. Canada's trade policy would become subject to American approval. Deadline, end of month. No extensions. No negotiation on the terms themselves. This wasn't a negotiating position. It was designed to be unacceptable. The goal wasn't agreement, it was forcing Canada into a corner where they'd have to choose between economic pain and political humiliation. The playbook has been consistent for decades. Apply maximum pressure. Make extreme demands. Wait for the other side to crack. It works when targets have no alternatives. When their economies are so dependent on American access that resistance becomes economically suicidal. Washington looked at the numbers. 75% of Canadian exports go to the United States. No other market comes close. Canada's entire economic structure is built around American trade. The calculation seems straightforward. Face ultimatum. Panic. Make private calls asking for flexibility. Accept most demands while getting minor face-saving concessions. Trump gets his headline. Canada preserves dignity while basically complying. That's how these things have always worked. The White House expected public outrage from Carney, followed by quiet capitulation within days. They expected Canadian business leaders to flood Ottawa with desperate calls. They expected Bay Street to pressure the government into accepting terms. They expected the usual playbook. Carney scheduled a press conference 2 hours after the ultimatum went public. Not the next day. Not after consultations. 2 hours. He stood at the podium with the Canadian flag behind him. No teleprompter. No notes. And he opened not with rhetoric, not with outrage, but with numbers. Canada supplies 60% of American uranium imports. American nuclear reactors depend on this fuel. There are no immediate alternatives at scale. 3.8 million barrels of Canadian crude oil enter American refineries daily. Those refineries are physically engineered to process heavy Canadian crude. They cannot simply switch to Saudi light crude overnight. The equipment is different. The processes are different. Canadian aluminum flows directly into American military aircraft. F-35 production depends on Canadian materials. Canadian lumber builds American homes. Prices are already elevated. Cutting off Canadian supply would make housing costs spike further. New England faces rolling blackouts without Canadian electricity during winter peaks. The grid infrastructure is integrated. You cannot separate it quickly. He let each fact settle before moving to the next. No emotion, just dependency mapped out in precise detail. Then he delivered the line that changed everything. Canada will not comply with any demand issued through ultimatum. We do not negotiate under threat. We have spent the last 12 months ensuring we do not need to. That last sentence was the reveal. This wasn't panic. This was execution of a prepared plan. Carney announced 3 immediate actions. Each one revealed months of preparation. First, fast-tracking energy infrastructure to bypass American markets entirely. Pipelines to Pacific ports, electrical grid connections to overseas buyers, LNG terminals for Asian markets, projects planned for the next decade now receiving emergency funding and accelerated timelines. Canadian oil currently flowing south will flow west within months. Canadian electricity will power Asian data centers instead of American cities. The infrastructure wasn't proposed. It was already funded. Permits were already approved. Construction was ready to begin. Second, expanding trade agreements with China, India, and the European Union. Canola, wheat, barley, critical minerals, products squeezed by American tariffs redirected to markets representing over 3 billion consumers. The agreements weren't being negotiated. They were already negotiated. Carney was activating them. Third, every federal contract held by an American company now under immediate review. Canadian procurement will prioritize Canadian suppliers first, allied nations second, American firms last. Not permanently, Carney emphasized, but for as long as Canada is treated as an adversary, Canada will purchase accordingly. These weren't threats. These were actions already in motion, waiting for authorization. The White House scramble. The official response came within an hour. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt called Canada's response disappointing and urged constructive engagement. Read that language carefully. Not defiant, not dismissive, disappointed, urging engagement. That's not the tone of strength. That's the tone of a side that expected compliance and received strategic defiance instead. Behind closed doors, sources say the reaction was closer to panic. Senior advisors asking how Canada had time to prepare this level of response. Intelligence assessments being demanded on Canadian planning. Questions about whether anyone had war-gamed what happens if Canada actually doesn't fold. The assumption had been total. Canada cannot survive a trade war with America. The textbooks all say so. The dependency numbers make it obvious. But Carney wasn't following the textbook. He was rewriting it in real time. The 12-month preparation. Here's what stunned Washington most. The realization that every countermeasure Carney announced had been prepared months in advance. While Trump issued threats, Carney was building escape routes. The trade agreements were pre-negotiated, ready for activation. The energy infrastructure had funding allocated and permits approved. The procurement reforms were drafted and awaiting signature. Carney didn't improvise when the ultimatum arrived. He executed a plan that was ready long before it came. This was strategic foresight versus tactical improvisation. And Washington just discovered which approach wins. What the demands revealed. Now let's analyze what Trump's ultimatum actually exposed about American vulnerability. Demand 1. Eliminate retaliatory tariffs while American tariffs remain. This isn't negotiation. This is demanding unilateral surrender. It reveals Trump has no actual leverage. He's hoping Canada will fold from pressure alone. Demand 2. Guaranteed purchases of American goods. This reveals American manufacturers are struggling to compete. If American products were superior in quality and price, mandated purchases wouldn't be necessary. This demand admits American industry needs captive markets because it cannot win open competition. Demand 3. Abandon trade negotiations with competitors. This reveals Washington's real fear. Not that Canada becomes a Chinese ally, but that Canada becomes less dependent on America. The demand itself admits that American economic leverage depends on Canada having no alternatives. Every demand was an admission of vulnerability disguised as strength. And Carney read each one for exactly what it was. The American business response. Within hours, American business leaders began pushing back. Not Canadian voices, American institutions telling their own government the ultimatum backfires. The National Association of Manufacturers urged immediate de-escalation. They understand supply chains. They know Canadian components flow into American factories. A 50% tariff doesn't just hurt Canada, it shuts down American production. The American Petroleum Institute warned that Canadian crude is irreplaceable for Gulf Coast refineries. Those facilities are specifically engineered for heavy crude. Switching to other sources would require billions in refinery modifications and years of reconfiguration. The American Automotive Policy Council projected billion-dollar supply chain disruptions. Cars built in North America cross the border 7 times during manufacturing. Tariffs on Canadian goods mean tariffs on American auto production. Home builders warned about lumber costs. Agricultural groups worried about potash for fertilizer. Defense contractors flagged aluminum supply issues. These aren't Canadian lobbyists. These are American business leaders calculating how Trump's ultimatum damages American interests. The dependency trap. Here's the strategic miscalculation Washington made. They assumed dependency flows one direction. Canada needs American markets more than America needs Canadian resources. The numbers support that assumption. 75% of Canadian exports versus maybe 15% of American imports. Looks asymmetric. But Carney understood something Trump missed. It's not about volume. It's about specificity. Canada can redirect canola and wheat to other buyers. Markets exist. China and India consume massive amounts of agricultural products. Europe needs energy. Asia wants critical minerals. But American refineries engineered for Canadian heavy crude? There is no quick substitute. American nuclear plants dependent on Canadian uranium? No alternative supplier at comparable scale and reliability. New England electrical grids integrated with Canadian power? You cannot rewire that infrastructure in months. Canada's exports to America may be larger by volume, but America's dependence on specific Canadian resources is harder to replace. Carney weaponized that asymmetry. The game Trump didn't expect. The Trump administration operates on intimidation. Make extreme demands. Apply maximum pressure. Force capitulation through overwhelming threat. It works against countries with weak economies, corrupt institutions, or authoritarian regimes desperate for legitimacy. It doesn't work against advanced democracies with competent leadership and strategic patience. Carney isn't playing the game Trump expected. He's not trying to out-threaten Washington. He's not matching rhetoric with rhetoric. He's systematically building alternatives that make American threats irrelevant. While Trump focuses on the next headline, Carney is constructing infrastructure that will function for decades. This is strategic depth versus tactical improvisation, long-term planning versus reactive pressure. And it's revealing which approach actually delivers power. The 3 bad options. Trump now faces 3 paths, none of them good. Option 1, follow through on the tariffs. Watch American gas prices spike. Housing costs explode. Auto manufacturers announce layoffs in swing states. Refineries struggle with fuel supply. Nuclear plants face fuel shortages. All while Canadian products flow to eager buyers in Asia and Europe. Trump owns the economic pain. Carney has alternatives. Option 2, quietly walk back the ultimatum. Suffer the humiliation of blinking first. Demonstrate to every country watching that American threats are negotiable if you call the bluff. Destroy the credibility of future ultimatums. Option 3, escalate further. Impose even harsher measures against a country that has just proven it will not fold and has alternative markets for everything America needs. Risk turning a trade dispute into a genuine rupture with the closest ally and largest trading partner. Every option hurts Trump more than it hurts Carney. And Carney knows it. The closing message. Carney ended his address with words now circulating in every diplomatic channel on the planet. To any government that mistakes Canadian kindness for weakness, let me be absolutely clear. Those days are over. Simple. Direct. Unmistakable. 2 hours ago, the White House thought it was delivering a knockout blow. 2 hours later, Washington is realizing it created the most formidable opponent it has faced in decades. The man on the other side isn't playing the game Trump expected. He prepared for this exact scenario while Washington was still assuming Canada would fold under pressure. He built alternatives while Trump was drafting threats. He positioned Canada to survive a trade war while Washington was calculating how quickly Canada would surrender. This wasn't improvisation. This was strategic mastery. And now the entire world is watching what happens when preparation meets pressure, when strategy confronts intimidation, when a country that was supposed to have no choice reveals it's been building choices for months. Trump wanted submission. He got a masterclass in strategic planning. He wanted a quick capitulation. He got a long-term adversary who understands the game better than anyone in Washington expected. Mark Carney just proved something Washington didn't want the world to see. American economic dominance depends on other countries having no alternatives. And those alternatives can be built. The question now isn't whether Canada will fold. The question is how many other countries were watching and taking notes.